Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm so sorry I didn't post anything for the month of October. It's been over 40 days since my last post, so we have a lot of ground to cover. But I hope that you're well. I hope that the energies are treating you well. I know there's a lot of different camps of people out there right now, some that are in a lot of fear, some that are feeling very optimistic, some that are in the middle. Me, I'm a chronic optimist, right? So if you need something to look forward to, something to hold on to, I got you. But I'm not just going to be a Pollyanna. I have receipts, I have reasons for why I'm excited right now. And it has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with astrology. So I'm falling back in love with astrology, head over heels. And today I really want to talk about Pluto moving into Aquarius. I honestly think that this is going to be the most significant transit of our lifetimes, right? Because it's a once in a lifetime transit. It won't happen again for another 240 years. It hasn't happened for about 240 years. And every time it does happen, the world changes significantly in terms of like data points and receipts that you can pull on an astrological transit. Pluto in Aquarius is crazy. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and place my bets and say it. I honestly think that this is the age of Aquarius, the one that they sing about. This is the dawning of, and the reason why I'm saying that is not just because we have Pluto moving into Aquarius on November 19th, a couple days from now, but because we also had that crazy conjunction back in 2020 on December 21st of 2020, the day of the solstice, right? Yeah, the winter solstice. We had the grand conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, which only happens about once every 900 years, and it happened at 0 degrees of Aquarius, right? And considering that these things happened so close to each other, the grand conjunction and now Pluto moving into Aquarius officially, at least within the cosmic scale, it's a blink of an eye, right? It's like, I think that that's very significant. There's also one really weird, interesting thing. Back in 2020, January of 2020, before anything went crazy, I remember I saw a clip of a red carpet interview at some award show in Hollywood where it was Jennifer Aniston, don't shoot the messenger, she was just the one that said it, but she's talking to a reporter and she says in a very like coy kind of I know something you don't know manner that we just moved into the age of Aquarius. She says, "Oh, did you know we just entered the age of Aquarius?" And I remember being so confused when I heard that because I'm like, "What? Who is telling Jennifer Aniston that we just moved into the age of Aquarius?" Right? Because there's nothing else that really seems to signify that. But I'll be the first one to say that I don't resonate with the idea of the precession of the equinoxes, right? That each of these cycles is like 2,000 years long and blah, blah, blah. Because based on that math, it's like we have another couple hundred years to go. And it just doesn't make sense to me. But if you told me that these massive collective cycles happen in like a 250-year span, that makes sense because empires seem to rise and fall within the span of about 200 or 300 years, right? So that's what I'm saying about Pluto in Aquarius. That's why I really think that this is the age of Aquarius with all of the stuff that the song sings about coming with it. And let's just get into the receipts. So first I'm going to talk about Pluto. Then I'm going to talk about Pluto in Capricorn, which is the transit that we're leaving. Then I'm going to talk about Pluto in Aquarius. And then I'm going to give just some, I don't want to call them predictions, but at least what I'm seeing with the energy leading up to March of 2025. So if you're seeing this video in the future, this is going to be good through at least March of 2025. But then again, Pluto is a 20-year transit. So if the internet is still here in 20 years, how you doing? Okay, so let's talk about Pluto. Pluto is supposed to be a planet that represents radical transformation, but to me, it represents anything that is hidden or buried underneath the visible structures of our reality, right? So Pluto was the god that governed the underworld. The underworld is anything that takes place out of sight. It is not seen. It's covered, buried, hidden. So it's going to represent the substructures behind the matrix, right? So the wizard behind the curtain, so to speak. And that's what Pluto seems to kind of direct its wrath towards, so to speak. On the collective level towards people, I think that this is going to be, because of the aspect of radical transformation and reinvention, we're going to see a lot of that on the personal level in terms of people switching their belief systems, maybe opening up to a more open source belief system. I think we're going to see people changing political parties. I think our political parties in general are going to change, and possibly even our governments. I'll get to that in a moment. But another interesting thing about Pluto is that the United States just had its Pluto return, right? So there's a chart out there, it's called the Sibley chart. It takes place on July 4th, 1776, at whatever time of day they think they signed the Declaration of Independence. And that's considered the United States birth chart, right? I know that we can debate that, but that's at least what they work with. So according to that chart, the United States had its Pluto return on February 22nd of 2022. So that date would have been 2/22/22, right? The ultimate 222 portal. And you have to wonder, it's like, could they have possibly known that far into the future that that would have been the date of the Pluto return? I mean, they understood astrology back then, so maybe they knew, and maybe that's why they picked that time and date. I don't know. But it's interesting, right? The reason why that became such a thing in the last 2 years, there were so many different astrologers talking about that, is because it's believed that the Roman Empire collapsed during its Pluto return. I personally would push back against that because I don't think the Roman Empire ever really collapsed. She just rebranded, right? Same girl, different party dress. But there are significant changes that came, from that return. The other interesting thing, and I'm just going to put this here for humor purposes, but there's that secret group that they call the Illuminati, and there was that real Illuminati that was almost like a Masonic lodge type of thing, and that was founded in 1776. So that would imply that the Illuminati itself has had its Pluto return and is in its own state of either collapse or transformation or something, but I just think that's funny. So let's talk about Pluto and Capricorn first, because that's the transit that we're coming out of. So Capricorn itself is the sign that's going to represent big systems, finance, government, law, all of those things that are very much so associated with Saturn, like Saturnian energies, long-term systems, big government, big financial institutions. And what's interesting about Pluto's transit through Capricorn is that Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008, right? What was the big global event that happened in 2008? It was the financial collapse. And that financial collapse really kind of set up, or I should say set the stage for the next 16 years between then and now, right? Because it happened in September of 2008, the financial collapse. At least that's when it really exploded. That really ushered in Obama into the White House, which kind of dictated what happened over those 8 years, which then ultimately ushered in the next couple of presidents, right? And the other things that are interesting that happened on top of that financial collapse is that, well, first I'll say, think about the institutions that did get hit the hardest by that transit. So it was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, etc. Institutions that are behind the institutions that we interface with, right? Because nobody really has a checking account with Bear Stearns, right? But your bank probably does have, or at least did before they collapsed, right? So these are systems behind the systems that we interface with. And the reason why they got hit is because they were unsustainable, right? It was a bubble that burst, right? It was an unsustainable, flawed system that had grown beyond its reach, right? Other interesting things that happened as a result of that collapse was that we had the Occupy movement, right? The Occupy Wall Street movement. And if you look at how that evolved over time, I would argue that that's the movement that not only did it kind of fracture off and become the truther movement, which went in a more like 9/11 truth kind of direction and things like that, but it also would have given birth to other things. It would have given birth to Antifa and BLM and Just Stop Oil and all of those other movements on all different directions, right? It's like this paradigm that we're living in right now was really born during that transit, right? Another interesting thing is that, so again, this transit was 2008 through 2024, right? So in 2010, we had Julian Assange and WikiLeaks with that whole Michigots, right? And it's interesting because it's like his story would have, at least in the public eye, it would have begun in the beginning of that transit, and then he was released from his, I don't want to call it prison. Well, he was in prison. Yeah, he was released from prison about 2 or 3 months ago, right? So at the very tail end of this transit, he's released and free. Very interesting. We also have Edward Snowden. That was 2013, but it was still in the midst of this transit, right? So two things that massively had to do with disclosure and, again, like the hidden hand behind the curtain, right? People seeing things that they weren't supposed to see. And so, again, that's why I really associate Pluto with things that are buried, hidden beneath the surface. And in today's modern age, I would associate it with data, right? Hidden data, stolen data, data that has been collected without our consent or knowledge, things like that. I think that that's going to be a very big aspect of what we see play out when Pluto officially moves into Aquarius in terms of what's been happening with our data. And that was something that Snowden was talking about with the NSA. It was something that Assange has spoken about numerous times. So just very interesting, right? And then again, the Occupy movements, all of that. It's also worth noting that this transit included 2012, 2016, and 2020, right? So 3 years to end all years were included in this one little Capricornian transit, right? Other just interesting things that I remember in terms of like rabbit holes that went mainstream during this transit, we had in 2015, 2016, the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect was everywhere in 2016. Everybody was talking about it. What else was happening? Simulation theory became a very popular topic of conversation. There was that video that went viral that included all the clips from like Neil deGrasse Tyson and these other scientists and Elon Musk and other people basically implying that they believed in simulation theory because of different, scientific anecdotes, right? So, and then also 2016, everybody was talking about D-wave quantum computers and CERN and things like that. And now look at the world that we're in today. Nobody talks about D-wave anymore, but AI is everywhere, right? To the point where reality is almost impossible to discern, right? Everything is so subjective and so plausibly deniable that like we don't really know what's real anymore. And it's fascinating because Terence McKenna spoke about this, and I just saw this clip recently again on Instagram, which is interesting. But he talked about, I don't know, I think he referred to it as time wave zero. Other people call it the singularity, other people call it the event, other people can call it Dolores Cannon's New Earth, whatever you want to call it. But he was saying that as we approach that event, reality is going to become so weird and glitchy that it's going to be impossible to not talk about it. But in the same respect, you're not going to know what's true and what's not true and yada yada. And then that was his canary in the coal mine, right? When we get there, we know the singularity is close, and we are absolutely there, right? And another thing, I would say the hidden history rabbit hole really kind of exploded during that time, because I remember at the same time as all of those simulation theory videos and yada yada, we had what was her name? New Earth. There was the New Earth channel on YouTube. She was really big back then, and she would talk about the hidden history rabbit hole and all of these anomalies, right? And the concept of the flamenco chronology versus the Scaligerian chronology. So Scaligerian chronology, you could call that like the Smithsonian timeline, right? That it started with the Sumerians, and then Jesus was year zero, and here we are 2,000 years later, right? The flamenco timeline is the idea that upwards of 1,500 years have just been inserted into the timeline that shouldn't really be there, right? Very interesting stuff. Other things that happened during this transit in terms of disclosure, right? So we have Assange and Snowden and all of these other things. We had Epstein. We just had Diddy. We had Weinstein in Hollywood and all of the other power players behind the scene that were abusing power, right? I'm mentioning all of this because these things that I've mentioned, everything from Assange and Snowden to Diddy and yada yada, this is foreshadowing what is about to come. I would honestly argue that this is the foreshadowing of like where we're going to see the disclosure come from, right? And another thing about data, I think a big aspect of what we're going to see in terms of data is specifically genetic data. And what's interesting about Jeffrey Epstein is he was arrested twice during this Capricornian transit. First back in like 2011, 2013, and then the second time back in, what was that, 2018, 2019? I don't remember. Either which way, when he was released from jail the first time, he opened a company that was called Southern Trust. And to look at it from the surface, it just looks like a bank. But the only thing that they were banking was genetic data, right? So think 23andMe, Ancestry.com, etc. So you have to think, what would a psychopath like that want with genetic data? Well, just recently, within the last couple of months, apparently everybody from the board, I think it was the board of 23andMe, resigned, one of those companies. So something's coming, something's a brewing in terms of what they've been doing with genetic data and all of those different things. And it'll be interesting to see, because like I said, I think that everything we've seen thus far has been the foreshadowing of what is yet to come. Now, what's interesting is that Pluto entered Aquarius just for a second to give us a real idea of foreshadowing of where it's going to hit. And the first time it hit Aquarius for a second was back in March of 2023, so last year. It was March 23rd, 2023. Pluto just kissed Aquarius for a second. And 2 weeks before that, we had a bank collapse in the United States, which was called the Silicon Valley Bank. And it's another one of these institutions that's behind an institution. The only reason I even knew that it existed or that it had even happened was because the company that I worked for at the time routed our payroll through that bank. I guess there was some sort of digital app that we were using to process payroll, and between the time it leaves my boss's account to the time it hits mine, at some point it goes through Silicon Valley Bank, right? So it's Plutonian, it's behind the systems, but it was also the bank of Silicon Valley, big tech, the digital realm, very Aquarian, right? So it'll be interesting to see if there's any kind of turbulence as we move into this. I know that, talking about bank collapses and things like that is not anything to be optimistic about necessarily, but in the same respect, I think it's going to be different this time. Primarily because we were still in a very Capricornian energy when that happened the last time, right? And let's just juxtapose it, right? Capricorn is the devil card. Aquarius is the star card. It doesn't get any more night and day than these two energies, right? This is the darker and heavier side of this transit, and the star card is Aquarius is going to be a much lighter, much more progressive side of this transit, right? Pluto itself is the judgment card, right? So it's the judgment card bringing judgment to the devil, and then eventually bringing that judgment to the star. And in terms of the judgment card, I always associate this with, if you've ever taken an exam that has a time limit, right? So you have 1 hour to finish this exam. As soon as that 1 hour is up, it's pencils down and you get scored, right? That's what Pluto, or excuse me, Jupiter, judgment reminds me of. It reminds me of that like pencils down kind of moment where everything gets tallied and scored. And because the star talks to me about being in alignment with destiny, this is very much so giving me the energy of like course correction, right? It's like, what is the devil up to? Who does he have in bondage here? What's going on that's not supposed to be going on? And how do we course correct? How do we kind of move things where they need to go? Because the star card also talks to me about the energy of irrigation, right? Like irrigating a field, moving the water where it's supposed to go, where you want it to go, as opposed to where you don't want it to go, right? So now we're going to talk about Pluto in Aquarius, and I have historical receipts that are going to blow your mind. So we're going to talk about the last 500 years, basically, because we had Pluto in Aquarius from 1530 through 1553, I think. What was it? 1532 to 1553. And then we had Pluto in Aquarius again from 1778 through 1798, which is the revolutionary period, right? So first, in terms of Aquarius, Aquarius always talks about innovation, reinvention, quantum leap advancement. It's very much so, it's like a quantum leap in collective evolution, right? That's typically what it represents. It's also very much so an underdog energy. It's the energy of kind of breaking away from tyranny. And here are my receipts on that. So, during the 1500s, again, 1532 to 1553, technically the Renaissance period, right? We have the Protestant Reformation, the birth of Calvinism, Henry VIII, and the birth of the Anglican Church and separation from the Catholic Church, and the first time in history that the Bible was printed in the vulgar tongue. So whether it was English, French, German, whatever, there was an explosion in literacy because of the printing press, because of the availability, and also because of, the separation or the escape, the breakaway from the Holy Roman Empire, basically. And what's interesting, because I was reflecting on that transit, and it's funny, right? Because if you go back to the Protestant Reformation, they would probably say that they were doing what they were doing under the guise of religious freedom, right? That really brought in a new era of religious freedom and sovereignty and autonomy. But we know that the Protestants were just as terrible as the Catholics, right? They probably burnt just as many witches at the stake, if not more. So it's not exactly like they were saints. But what's interesting is that the next time Pluto comes around, 240 years later, we do actually get religious freedom, right? It's like that's amendment number 1 in the Constitution. And it was obviously born out of the transit that came previously, just because of the mess that was the Protestant Reformation and all of the wars that came from it and yada yada. So I think that that's interesting, that it's like every time Pluto comes back around, it's like it fixes the thing that didn't exactly work, right? Because if you then fast forward to the transit of 1778 to 1798, that would have been the revolutionary period where we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the birth of the Democratic Republic, and the death of the monarchy, right? But Democratic Republic is still kind of subjective. North Korea calls itself the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. China calls itself the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So, and the other thing is that, did the monarchy really die, or did it just become the corporatocracy, right? Did it just become BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street? That's what I think it became, right? And that's what I think it's going to hit, right? So the Holy Roman Empire becomes the monarchy, becomes the corporatocracy. It's like that's the thing that is going to get just kind of poked. And if religious freedom was the thing that was kind of sort of born during the 1500s, but then officially crystallized in the 1700s, then I would say that democracy is the thing that was kind of sort of born in the 1700s that's actually going to be born this go round. And it's interesting, right? Because it's like, this is the prophecy, mark my words. There's going to be a compilation video that comes out eventually that shows political people on all sides of the aisle, left, right, center, and different, saying the same thing. This is the last election. They all said it 101 different times. Even Oprah said it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was ridiculous. But you have to wonder, it's like, what that could really kind of mean anything, right? It's like perhaps something beautiful happens that reinvents our system in such a wonderful, holistic, loving way that whatever happens next makes the previous election look like the last election because it's so different, right? But the energy of Aquarius, at least the age of Aquarius, it does make me think of things like open source. It's like if I had to use a word to describe Aquarius or Pluto in Aquarius, I would say open source, right? I'm going to put a hyphen between those two words so it's one word. Open source. And that's really where I see systems going in the future. It's like if Aquarius has its way, if these transits have their way and do what they're supposed to do, that's where it's going to push things, right? To kind of literally give power back to the people, right? Because that was the concept of what was supposed to happen during the revolution, right? It was supposed to be a power to the people kind of a movement, and then the corporatocracy shows up and says, psych, surprise, we're actually going to give power to the corporations, and you'll know, what did they say? You'll own nothing and be happy, right? So that's not going to happen, not on my timeline. But other interesting things that happened during that last transit of Pluto and Aquarius, again, 1778 to 1798, we had a massive explosion of occultism, like a revival of occultism that really happened in France, primarily because the Catholic Church had been so disempowered, right? So it was allowing people to talk about alchemy and mysticism and astrology. And the first famous tarot card reader came out of that era, which was Marie Lenormand, right? The Lenormand tarot card deck. She was a very famous reader in Revolutionary era France. She's believed to have done readings for Empress Josephine, Napoleon's generals, and all of that. But then we also know that Marie Antoinette and Louis the 16th or whatever, that they were subscribers to a newsletter that was published by a guy whose last name was Atella or Atelier or something like that. But he was a famous occultist that would talk about astrology and tarot and all of those things. And they know that Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI were reading all of this stuff, right? Which is very interesting to think of in the context of that. I have to wonder what their tarot readings would have looked like, but I digress. So where are my final cards here? Of course, I got more cards than I can even count. But, okay, so again, I do think that we're very much so moving into the age of Aquarius, but it feels turbulent, okay? I'm not going to lie. I do feel like the next couple of months are going to be a bumpy ride, just in terms of everything that's happening around us. Very much so eye of the storm energy, right? It's happening around us, but it's not happening to us or anything like that. But turbulent in the sense of unpredictability, just because all of these systems that I mentioned are in the process of cannibalizing themselves, right? The political parties, they don't have any energy to fight each other at this point because they are so busy fighting themselves. And we're seeing that with every institution, with everything worldwide, right? Which is a good thing ultimately, because they're going to bring some checks and balances to that situation. But in addition to the Pluto transit, right? So Pluto's officially entering Aquarius on November 19th, next week. Just before that, Saturn is going to go direct, right? So that's kind of a good thing. We have Saturn in Pisces. That's going to go direct on the 15th. On November 25th, we have Mercury retrograde, which goes through December 15th. Then we have a Mars retrograde, which goes from December 6th through February 25th, and a Jupiter retrograde, which goes from October 9th, which just happened, through, again, February of 2025. I think I said that right. Yeah. I'm just saying all of that to say this is why it looks like there's a lot of turbulence, just because there are so many retrogrades that are happening. And retrogrades to me are always about recalibration and reassessing and fixing things and plot twist kind of energy. But what's giving me a lot of hope is that supernova that I've spoken about. And if you've never heard me talk about this before, there's a star that's supposed to go supernova. It's in a constellation that's called Corona Borealis, go figure. And apparently this star goes supernova once every 80 years. The last time it went supernova was just after World War II. The previous time before that was just after the Civil War. And the time before that was just after the Revolutionary War. It's supposed to go supernova any day now. They've been predicting it all summer. They've been predicting it by the end of September. Now scientists are kind of hoping that it doesn't happen anytime soon because apparently it's behind the sun, so they won't see it, but I don't care. Apparently, if you look at history, when this star goes supernova, it means the war is over. And there's a part of me that thinks that our grandchildren one day are going to learn in school that this time period is called some sort of war, some sort of Cold War, whatever it is, right? We're not referring to it as a war right now, but there's something that tells me that history is going to treat this time period very differently. And the other thing that I want to say is that, so we had that transit of Saturn and Jupiter going conjunct at 0 degrees of Aquarius back in 2020, right? The big grand conjunction. Again, that was at 0 degrees of Aquarius, which is what Pluto is about to touch. On Inauguration Day, which is going to be January 20th of 2025, that is 0 degrees of Aquarius, right? The sun will enter 0 degrees of Aquarius on that day. Pluto will only be at about 1 degree of Aquarius because she moves slow. Saturn and Jupiter are such massive bodies that there's a part of me that thinks that the energy of that conjunction is still resonating at that degree, 0 degrees of Aquarius, right? Like imagine if you hit a gong and you could hear it an hour later, right? Like still reverberating. Pluto was very, very much so a part of that conjunction because Pluto was in the critical final degrees of Capricorn along with Saturn and Jupiter before they went conjunct, right? So Pluto went conjunct with both of them numerous times as it retrograded back and forth before that conjunction ever happened, right? So when the sun moves into Aquarius, Pluto is going to go kazemi or combust, right? And I think of that as like an activation, right? That's when things really kind of activate. As the planet had kind of moved around the sun the whole year, collecting all of this data, going through all of these changes. It's like when the sun hits the planet, that's the same idea as kind of like if you've ever like downloaded software that you have to reboot your computer for. It's like the sun going kazemi with Pluto is the computer activating, right? The reason why I'm saying this is because there are a lot of things that are being set up right now that are still very abstract, and we don't know what it's going to look like. But those things are going to activate and go live on the 20th of January, right? As soon as they get into office, they're going to sign all the bills, and all of these things are going to change. People are not going to take it well. Let's just say that. People don't take anything well. So people are not going to take this well. That's why I think that the time period, especially the month of February, is going to be bumpy. It's going to be a lot of crazy emotional things that are moving through the collective. What the voice in my head is telling me is make it through March. Make it through March, make it through March. Hold in there, do not give up, do not lose faith, do not find yourself in a negative place through March, if you can hang in there. The only other time that I've ever heard this as clearly was in November of 2019. In November of 2019, I kept hearing, make it through March. March of 2020, the world changed. We all know how that went. Personally, my life changed for the better in a lot of different ways. But the energy is different this time because in 2019, I was feeling very nihilistic about the energy, and I honestly thought that the world was going to end, honestly. And it kind of did, right? But not exactly the way that I planned. So this time it feels very different, but it's just kind of like a hang in there energy. Like don't let the echo chamber of fear fool you or convince you of anything, or the echo chamber of false hope or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? Just kind of staying the course in your own right. And the reason why I'm really harping on the make it through March thing is because I had a dream 2 years ago. So it would have been in 2020. Actually, it would have been late March of 2022, excuse me. And yeah, anyways, in the dream, I was outside with a friend of mine, and all of a sudden there was this ruckus in the skies. And I saw what looked like a UFO kind of fly past me overhead. And then I saw what looked like a fighter jet chasing the UFO. So, of course, my friend and I freaked out, and we ran out to the front yard to see what was going on. And when we went out there, we saw that there were thousands of ships, I guess, descending from the sky. It almost looked like a highway of ships in all directions. You could see it everywhere, that they were all just kind of landing. And each of these ships looked like an iPad. And I remember my friend grabbed my arm in the dream and they said, "Wow, happy birthday" to me. And I said, "No, happy rebirth day." So my birthday is in March. What's really funny about that is a week after I had this dream, I was at a restaurant and the table next to me was having a birthday, and somebody said at the table, "Happy birthday," and the person retorted, "No, happy rebirth day." So I thought that was really interesting. But the way that I processed this dream was that to me, each of those iPads that were coming from the sky represented data, right? The return of data, the return of truth, right? Like autonomy over our own data and control over our experience here. And the reason why I say that is because there's a scene in the TV show Westworld that is really, really imprinted on my subconscious. And it was Westworld season 3. And it's a spoiler, but you don't need to know anything about the show. Basically, the entire world is secretly being controlled by an algorithm that basically dictates every aspect of your life down to the moment you die, right? So it determines, how much money you're allowed to make, where you're allowed to live, who you're going to marry, if you're going to marry, when you're going to die, how you're going to die, etc. But nobody knew this. Well, one day on the TV show, somebody presses the magic button and everybody gets to see their algorithm, right? And of course, that doesn't go over well. This algorithm is exactly what I'm talking about with all of the data that's being stolen from people, right? In terms of what is being done with the data, right? Especially think too, everybody's astrological data is out there, right? Everybody has an astrology app where they've placed their exact birth and time and location and all of those things, right? So we have that data, the genetic data, our overall metadata from all of our user history. It's like, it's a weird triangulation of things that everybody kind of has their hands on right now. But again, in this TV show, once that data was sent back to the people, it kind of broke everybody out of the algorithm. And one thing that the TV show stressed was that the algorithm could not withstand spontaneity, right? If there's one thing the algorithm hates, it's unpredictable behavior. That was the same theme of the Matrix movies, right? When Neo finally meets the architect says to him, I created this entire maze because we couldn't figure out the free will algorithm. We could never balance it. We could never control it, right? So there was always going to be a degree of spontaneity. And the idea is that spontaneity breaks the algorithm, right? That was what that season of Westworld really stressed, was that anytime these characters chose to do something that was against their programming, it basically broke the entire script, right? Because it was an unpredictable variable. It reminds me of that app that came out a couple of years ago, 2019, 2020, that was called Randonautica. And the concept of Randonautica was that it used what they called a quantum random number generator to create an unpredictable coordinate that it would send you to. And because this coordinate was so unpredictable, the act of you going there would break you out of your algorithm and allow you to experience a glitch in the matrix. 2016, that election cycle, was not on anybody's bingo card. Even Trump himself did not expect to win. You could see it in his face that day. Every day since then has been a glitch in the matrix. The matrix could not handle another election like that. It is broken. The status quo is dead, right? We used to have Occam's razor, right? Occam's razor is the idea that the most rational scenario is the most likely scenario, right? I've been joking that since 2016, we now have Kanye's razor, where it's like the most absurd probability is the most likely, right? Because Kanye, love him or hate him, he is unpredictable, right? And most likely he's going to say something absurd, right? So it is Kanye's razor through and through right now. But the other thing is that the Matrix has been very glitchy, right? Remember that one Oscars ceremony a couple years ago where they announced the wrong movie for Best Picture, right? First they announced that it was going to be La La Land, and then somebody came out and said, no, it was the movie Moonlight. That's the reality that we are living in right now, right? So that's why I'm saying make it through March, hold in there, do not lose the faith, yada, yada. Because even if something looks like it is in stone, right? The name has been called, the award has been handed. It does not mean that it's actually true or happening. That is the reality that we are living in right now. So I really think that it's like the system just could not handle this. And the reason why is because the system does not have enough processing power to allow people to think, right? So that was another aspect of Westworld. There's a scene in Westworld where they realize that they're inside of a simulation, right? And there's 2 or 3 characters in the scene, and everybody around them, hundreds of people, they realize that they're all NPCs. One of them somehow figures out that if they ask the NPC a question that forces it to think, it glitched out the matrix, right? So this one character, Maeve, she asks the NPC, what's the square root of -1? Which I guess is like a proper, what do you call it, a theoretical, mathematical question that nobody knows the answer to, right? So the one NPC starts asking the other NPC and starts asking the other. And eventually they're all thinking so much that the simulation overheats, glitches, and freezes. And just the active players that were in the simulation could still move about, right? The problem with these glitchy things that have happened in the last, you know, 8 to 16 years is that it's forcing people to think. That's not good for the system because the system cannot handle people thinking. The system will overheat and the system will crash and glitch out, and that is what we are seeing right now. And the act of getting there, just like the other side of the finish line, is going to be glitchy, right? So maybe that's the right word. I don't really want to say turbulent. I don't want to say anything scary. Glitchy, I think, is what to expect between now and whatever it is that happens in March. I don't see what happens in March being something that you could trace back to any particular political figure or hero or whatever. It's like something tells me, again, it's like I feel like we're moving towards something open source, right? So open source means it's like if it's open source spirituality, it's me and the creator with no middleman whatsoever, right? If it's an open source hero's journey, you are the hero in your own story, right? You are the savior that you've been waiting for, all of that. So it does again feel like something almost like outside of what we're looking at. But with Pluto, it's like it's something hidden typically, right? So it's kind of a fool's errand to even predict what it might be. But the one thing I want to end it on is this Monday was 11/11. It also happened to be Veterans Day too, right? Remembrance Day, which is interesting in terms of synchronicity. And 11/11 always makes me think of the Four of Wands card. And the Four of Wands talks to me about the finish line being in sight, right? It's like you committed to the vision, you're running this marathon, you're finally at the final block of this 10-mile race you've been running, and you are exhausted, but the finish line is in sight, right? So it's saying, like, don't give up now. Use that last bit of energy to just hold the vision, right? And if there's something you don't want to see happen, keep saying, not on my timeline, not on my timeline, not on my timeline. They wish that they could, they wish they could even try, but they can't because you are the most powerful creator on your timeline, and that is it. Vice versa, if there's something that you do want to see happen, hold the vision, right? Because it is happening because you are the ultimate creator in your reality and you affirm that that thing is happening, right? It's like that is my belief. I wholeheartedly believe that we have a great deal of say over where this goes, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, we all want world peace, right? I'm sorry to sound like Miss Universe, but it's the truth, right? Everybody wants peace. So I hope that that was hopeful. I'm going to come back with my next video. I'm going to do an all signs reading for time-stamped all signs, looking at all 12 signs for this Pluto transit, what it means for you guys. And if you're interested in a reading for yourself, I now have a calendar that you can actually book through. So that will set up the Google meeting and all of that right away. And we can meet via Google Meets or Zoom or something like that. And you'll find the link in my bio. And other than that, thank you guys for hanging in there and checking in with me again. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your beautiful day. Bye, y'all.